Greetings, I'm Paris, and I'm going to talk to you about what is to come in the 7th grade scope and sequence for the week of September 19th through the 23rd. So let's go ahead and get started. First of all, I hope that everyone is doing very, very well. The temperature has dropped just a smidge, and so we have a little bit of breathing room outside in that not 101 degree weather. So hopefully we have something to cheer about with that. But I did want to talk to you about the week of September 19th through the 23rd. Basically, we are covering equations. That's strictly what's happening that week. First day, we're doing it with models. We're solving equations with models. Second day, we're modeling and solving equations. Third day, we're doing the same thing, except for we're also plotting or representing our solution on a number line. The fourth day, we are writing two-step equations from a word problem. And then the last day, we're going to solve and write. So that's what's to expect. I have this TEKS tree here just so you can kind of see again, the overarching idea is that we are going to both model and solve equations. It also says inequalities there. That's going to come later. And one variable, two-step equations. So that's the big idea. The TEKS that we're going to cover are 711A, 710B, and 710A. And I'll just read them here for you. Model and solve one variable, two-step equations, and inequalities. We'll deal with inequalities later. We're going to represent those solutions on a number line. And then we are going to write one variable, two-step equations within some constraints or conditions. All right, so first one, 711A, that's the biggie. That is our readiness, has been tested 10 times in 5 years, about 2 questions per year. And then we have 710B, that's our supporting. That's the one with the number line. That one has been tested 1 time here or there every year. I do expect that they are going to test it more frequently now that we have different question types. The next one is 710A. That one is writing the equation from the word problem. All right, so now that we know the TEKS that's covered, let's dig into what is going to be covered for each day. So on Monday, that is where we are solving two-step equations using models. I'm going to show you the Lead Forward resource that I'll show you what's in Eduphoria. So remember, the IQ star release questions are on Lead Forward, but also we have access to field guides, and I'm going to highlight a few things, not too many, just because I don't want to take up too much time and it's already in Eduphoria, but I do want to give you the tools so you can understand where some of this stuff comes from. One of the big things we look at is the scaffold, what was taught previously and what are they going to learn the following year. I will say equations is a foundational TEK for all of the coming grade levels. In 6th grade, students modeled and solved one variable, one-step equations. In 8th grade or in 7th grade, now they're going to do it with two-step equations. In 8th grade, they're going to do it with a variable on both sides. So the variable can be on both sides of the equation. So this is definitely going to be one of those TEKS that builds. Again, this TEK involves equations and inequalities. We're just going to focus on the equations part. Some of the things that you need to focus on instructionally is making sure that students are exposed to all 4 operations when they're solving. So adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing to be able to solve and isolate their variable. Some of the misconceptions that students may run into, a huge one is performing the incorrect operation when solving. So make sure they are doing the correct operation in order to isolate that variable. Academic vocabulary, equation, and an interesting item, which is funny because that's the item I picked to look at. This is what it looks like for an inequality. Those are the models that the state used, but I wanted to show you this one because this one is an equation. The model represents an equation. I'm going to work this here, and you can pause me if you want to take some time to work, but I do want to address a few things as I work through this problem. So having students set up the equation, there's 3 x's, there are 6 ones there, that is equal to 9 on the other side of the equal sign. what you're going to have students do is always identify that variable. That's what we want. That's what we want to isolate. A lot of different teachers have very good analogies for where to start when solving equations with the 3 and 6. So talk to your PLC and determine how they tell students where they would start. With this one, I would have students go ahead and I would ask them, what are they doing with the 6? They're adding. What's the inverse operation of 6? Subtracting. So subtract 6, remember, on both sides in order to keep that balance. So this, it will cancel, and I'm using air quotes here. I hate to even say it, but this will turn to 0. And so as you simplify, you would continue writing here. So 3x is equal to 3. Continue to solve. What is happening with 3 and x? They're multiplying 3 times x, so I'm going to divide by 3, and then I simplify. 3 divided by 3 is 1, with my x is equal to 1. We are going to be very fancy here, and we're not going to put that 1 in front of that x because it is not necessary. 1 times x is x. Alrighty, so oops, sorry. So now I have my equation here, and my answer is J. What I do want to point out is how the state got some of these incorrect answers, and I'm going to try to get through it briefly so I can have time to talk about the other ones. But x equals 3. Look at this. How could they have gotten x is equal to 3? I'll tell you. A fun thing that kids like to do is say 3 divided by 3 is 3. So that's one way. And then the next one is x plus 15. X is equal to 15. What they could have done, and what I told you guys, is instead of doing the correct inverse operation, instead of subtracting 6, they could have added 6 instead. So then they would have ended up with, they would have just annihilate, just said that cancel, which was incorrect. But they would have said 3x is equal to 15 and possibly have gotten that 15. The next way that students could have incorrectly solved this problem is they could have correctly solved after that first incorrect step. So divide this by 3, divide this by 3, x is equal to 5, and got an h. Most people ended up with, look at the state, ended up with f. I'm sorry, not most people. Most people got the correct answer, but f was the next highest incorrect answer. So just think about that as you're teaching this with your students. So here's a model. Students are going to have to solve and write the equations. Some instructions here down for whenever you do teach this to your students, some of the things that you may want to say and may want to hone in on for your students. The practice is pretty much the same. It has different models. Students are asked to solve the equations. So one is all modeled, all out model. Okay. Day 2, similar, but the model is pretty much just the equation that's given. So this day, make sure you're using a lot of turn and talk with your students, those talk moves. Make sure you're exposing them to that. Super thing about this day is making sure that students check their answers. We know that 7th grade does not escalate on our test unless they have those accommodations. And if they do, please let them use it. But checking themselves is going to be essential with this. It's also a test taking skill, making sure students check themselves, okay? Because but this is also 711A where they're just given an equation here. Okay, so take some time if you can and work through this problem because there are different ways that students could have gotten incorrect answers for this one as well. So Monday, students had models. Tuesday, students also may have models, but they're using the equations and they're checking their answer. Wednesday was extra TEK, if you guys can remember what that TEK was. Today, students are also not only modeling and solving, but they're also representing their solutions on a number line. So in Lead for 710B, and in here there's the field guide, and that's also in Eduphoria, and it's on the lesson overview. Again, just kind of look at that and see what students need to know, the instructional implications. This is what it looks like in order to represent a solution for an equation. That's what that looks like. This is for an inequality right here, but remember, we'll get to that another time. Some of the misconceptions, same thing. That this whole number line represents an entire unit. So just kind of make sure that students know how to plot that point. I will tell you, I put this TEK into Lead Forward and no questions came up for equations. only for inequalities. That is not to say the state may not decide to test it that way this year. What I did do is I found another equation, and you can go through and solve it, but for the sake of time, I won't. But the correct answer to this one is D, which is 2.52. So in addition to solving the equation, just have the students plot the point. 2.52 is 2.5-ish, so they would just plot that point here. And that's pretty much the extra piece they have to this. It's still important that students go through and solve and plot their points, because like I said, the STAR test may, and it's also good practice for when inequalities is coming up, for practice the notes and in the independent practice, for to be able to plot their answer choices or to represent it on a number line. So here again, they're solving, checking their answer, representing it on a number line. Solve it, checking their answer, representing it on a number line. So the notes are pretty straightforward with that, and just talking students through the steps, making you use those talk moves with students, get them to be able to, they're plotting that point, how do they know, and things of that nature. Thursday and Friday, switching gears, students are now going to be writing equations, given a real world problem. So these are pretty neat. 710A, when you go to real big, what students are going to need, there's so many different things that students are going to be able to successfully write an equation. They're going to need to understand what the coefficient, the constant is, words like per, each, and how that'll help them understand where the variable will go. Also, students need to be able to correctly solve the equations, of course, as well, once they have written the equation. There's just a few different things that students need to be able to do here. So here is when I put in 710A, again, only inequalities come up, but guys, it is so important for students to be able to write equations from a given real world scenario. TEK that has been tested quite a few times. Students are given a word problem and they have to write an equation. Students are given an equation and they have to make up a word problem. So it gets difficulties to make students know how to do this lesson is so important. So over here on the notes, because it gives the students, I'm just gonna skip right here because this one has an error, but it's still manageable to answer it. This is from a 6th grade. This is 6th grade because it's just one operation, but I'm just gonna go straight down here, 7th grade. So you're asking students to identify the variable and say what it means, what other information, what's the total, and write the equation. And that pattern, guys, is definitely going to help your students. I have it here. So for the variable, what's the variable that's given? What does that mean? How do you know? Making sure that each and per and things like that, remind students that will lend itself to being the coefficient and variable together. All right, so that is on Thursday. Again, still just taking the word problem into an equation. Friday is same thing. So you're gonna write the equation, but this time you're also going to solve it. So we were focusing on making sure students understood. It's awesome, but also now students are going to need to solve. So I have for you guys, again, it hasn't been STAR tested. This TEK for equations hasn't been STAR tested, but it's tested different ways. So it's super important, and it's one of those TEKs that is going to follow them throughout their entire longevity in school. So same thing, they have the equations here. They're gonna write them, have the students solve them as well. After this lesson, I believe there's a flex day in the calendar. You'll notice that there's a bunch of extra resources. Please take advantage to make sure that they know how to solve equations. That is going to help them out so much. I noticed that when I was toggling in between the different apps, the video started to glitch a little bit. So I'll just recap a few things, but I just wanted to talk about next week. Next week, there's going to be staff development and a flex day. In each of those lessons that I showed you, there's extra resources, and almost all of them. Please take advantage of the extra time you have to work with students on solving equations, checking their answer, and things of that nature. It's definitely going to come and handy for them when they solve inequalities as well, and then throughout their entire schooling. I told you about the TEK where the students are now given in that 710C. They're given a word problem. They're given an equation, and they have to make a word problem or select the correct word problem. And so that's the interesting way that the state has tested the TEK several times in the past. They are also going to need to solve two-step equations with geometric concepts, so that's coming up the following week. The apps that I was toggling in between, I was ability just my notes, show you the field guide and the star release questions as well. And then I also was going to Google Docs, and it was kind of glitching whenever I go in between the apps and I was talking, but I just was going between Notability, where I was working through those star release problems, and Google Docs over here, where I was actually clicking on the notes and going to the actual document. So I will take that note for my next videos I make, but hopefully this was helpful to you guys. Of course, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. I will be in PLCs more frequently, so definitely let me know.
Thank you so much for watching this video over the content that you'll teach in your classroom on the week of September the 19th. We hope that what you've learned here will help you be a contributing member to your PLCs the week of September 12th. In order to help us better serve you in the future and to let us know that you watched this video, please fill out the survey using the QR code on the left or the link that you see on your screen. Thank you again so much, and we are really looking forward to hearing about all the great things that are happening in your classroom.